From the California State Senate, this is Senate Spotlight.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Senate Spotlight, where we discuss legislative priorities and policy and other related issues with members of the California State Senate. From the state capitol here in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green, and joining us this time around, back with us this time around, is Senator Ben Allen, senator from the 26th Senate District, Santa Monica, and the California's beautiful coastline down there in the south, and also chair of the Senate Elections Committee. Welcome. Good to have you back again.
It's good to be here.
And we'll talk about elections in a little bit, but first, let's just talk about your late winter and spring and early summer. You came to Sacramento, and you didn't waste any time getting right into some extraordinary pieces of legislation and public policy. One of the most controversial ones of this year, and SB 277, the vaccination bill, which has been signed by the governor. Yeah. And obviously, we all know what it is and what it does, but as it has been signed, and after all the amendments, all of the changes, all of the debate and discussion, what does this bill do now as it stands to protect Californians, students, and the communities?
Right. Well, the most important thing is going to up our vaccination rates and put us in a place where we're going to be so much less likely to see outbreaks of dangerous communicable diseases that can impact everybody. And so I think that as this bill as it gets implemented, moms and dads will feel a little bit more confident taking their baby to the store, to the market, to public transportation, knowing that their government has taken steps to protect the public and protect those who aren't ready to get vaccinated or who can't get vaccinated, et cetera. Now, I should mention a couple things. First of all, anybody with a legitimate medical or scientific reason for not getting vaccinated should go to a doctor, get themselves a medical exemption, send their kids to school. There was a special carve out for protecting individualized education plans, special ed kids with IEPs, to make sure that those IEPs can be fully implemented. But now it's really about a very careful and thoughtful and sensitive implementation. And we're going to be talking closely with families and school districts and folks from all over the state to make sure that we get kids educated, that we make them safe, that we create a safe, healthy environment in our schools, and that will be free of outbreaks, that will be free of dangerous diseases, that will get kids into school learning.
There's still this tug of war out there on what is really still an extremely volatile issue, notwithstanding the mandates of the bill. And there's still the concern of parents who have this embedded distrust of things. And you have talked about it's the science. We're relying on the science. But there's these folks out there, thousands of them, who are still distrustful of the science.
Right.
Do you understand that? How do you respond to that distrust and concern that parents have post-bill signing, post-debate?
I think I see two different trends. One are those parents who say, look, there's a scientific reason, there's a medical reason for me not to get my kids vaccinated because they may have an allergy or maybe there's some kind of medical history in the family. Those people should be covered under this bill. I mean, they should be able to get medical exemptions. We actually specifically added in language about family medical history into the bill. And in fact, those folks actually have the most to gain from this law because, vaccines are not 100% effective, right? We're all protected by two things. We're protected by the fact that we are vaccinated ourselves, but we're also protected by the fact that everybody else is vaccinated. Those two factors together prevent you or I from getting polio, measles, mumps, whatever else. For those people who cannot get vaccinated or should not get vaccinated for whatever reason, there are very few cases, but for those people, the only thing that protects them is the fact that the rest of us are vaccinated. So those folks should be able to get a medical exemption, carry along with their education. I think the hardest cases are those people who really don't have a legit reason, and yet they still feel really strongly about this, and that's going to be the implementation challenge here. How do we reach out to them? How do we work with them? Maybe it's through a more delayed schedule of vaccination. Maybe it's also pressuring the companies that make these vaccines to kind of split out some of those vaccines to make families feel a little more comfortable. Maybe provide some alternatives on the market. Those are things I'd like to work on as we go forward.
So obviously still a work in progress, at least in terms of how it rolls out and
Absolutely.
how it's implemented. Great.
But the good news is that the government took steps to protect the broader public health, and I think as a result of this law, it's going to be much less likely that we will see similar outbreaks to what we saw last year in Disneyland.
Great. Well, obviously, you didn't come here to Sacramento just to focus on vaccinations. You have so many other legislative priorities. In particular, as I mentioned, you're chair of the Senate Education Committee, and you've been exploring elections committee, right? And you have been exploring this unacceptably low rate of voter turnout in this state, but particularly in Los Angeles, I know, where there have been some special elections that have been decided by a frighteningly small minority of voters. You've held hearings on the issues. You're looking at different states for implementation. What are some of your solutions? What do you hope to see in cooperation with our Secretary of State to improve voter turnout?
Yeah. So just to kind of put your comments into context, California had one of the lowest voter turnouts in the nation in 2014, the November elections. LA County, so the statewide voter turnout was 42%. LA County was 31%, a full 11 points below the state average. And if you know anything about how big LA is vis-a-vis the rest of the state, and know anything about math and statistics, that disparity is even more atrocious. The crazy thing is, 18 to 24-year-olds, 8%. And then if you look at the elections we just had in LA City earlier this year, the turnout was about 8.5 to 9%. So ridiculously low turnout. And I think it really does call into question the vitality of our democracy and our civic participation. So we've been looking all over the country, looking at what other states have done, and we got very excited after looking at a lot of different places, looking at Colorado and what they've done in Colorado, where they've been able to increase voter turnout. They jumped up to one of the highest voter turnout states in the nation, while also significantly saving taxpayer dollars. And how do they do this? Well, they create a model where everybody sent a ballot by mail, and then you have vote centers that are open for 10 days before Election Day, so including two full weekends. And they're everywhere. I mean, they're out there in community centers and libraries and public buildings and shopping centers, et cetera, so that people, I think there's about 25 all over Denver, and then there's an additional 25 separate kind of mail boxes, but they're special vote drop boxes. There, people can either bring in the ballot that they got in the mail, or they can just show up anytime. I mean, after this interview, and there might be a voter center somewhere nearby, and on my way to my next appointment, I'll just stop by and vote. Because they've got a really strong computer system in place, they can take care of their vote very quickly, knowing exactly where they live and cast their votes. It's done without, with a paper trail, so that every voter gets their ballot printed up from the computer system, and they're able to then drop it into the box, and it's counted separately. So there's so many different ways that people can vote. They can mail in their vote, they can drop off their ballot that they received in the mail, they can go into a voter center, which, by the way, will be fully equipped with bilingual staff, bilingual equipment, special accommodations for people with disabilities. So a lot of procedures and protections to make sure that everybody's right to vote is strongly protected.
And there's a direct correlation between these kind of centers and an extreme increase in voter turnout, right?
That's what they've seen in Colorado. And so we're looking to a bill to implement a similar type of situation, and we'll see exactly how the details are still all being worked out, and maybe there'll be a slower rollout, maybe there'll be a pilot, but or maybe just a full implementation. It's all in the works right now. But it's a very exciting innovation. I think that one thing that's clear is that the current situation of voter turnout is unacceptably low. And we really want to have a democracy, a government here in the Capitol that truly is representative of the population. And that's why we need to take some steps to make voting more convenient, to make sure we go to make things easier for voters to participate in the process.
And I know it's the locals on the ground who see the effects of this even in greater numbers than farther up into the state. Are they supportive of this? Is this something they're going to have to pay for? How's this going to work?
Yeah, no, well, so the idea would be to make it permissive so they could make their own decisions. Actually, it ends up costing less money in the long run, because instead of having those traditional precinct spots that you have all over the city, on every other block basically, on Election Day, you're able to consolidate those efforts. You're able to have really trained staff who know what they're doing. So there are going to be fewer vote centers, but they're going to be much more robust, and they're going to be all over the city anyway, and they'll be open for 10 days. So it does end up saving money, actually, and boosting voter turnout, if the example from Colorado is any guide. But we're working with them. They're asking a lot of questions. We're working out the details. This is all a very collaborative process. There's a lot of access and advocacy groups who've been participating and negotiating, and we just want to make sure this is going to work for everybody.
All right, from elections to environment. Oil spill up in Refugio Beach, just north of Santa Barbara, just a month or so ago as we speak. and wasn't as bad as it could have been, but still it was impactful, and of course right there at the heart of the environmental movement from the big oil spill in the 60s. You're an environmentalist. You have done so much in looking at the environment and preventing this type of thing. I know that this has kind of hit you in a gut reaction, a visceral reaction to what has happened up there, and even an effect coming down along the Southern California coastline. Talk about that.
Well, that's right. So everyone saw the images of the terrible impact on the beaches in Santa Barbara. And by the way, let's not forget the economic impact this has had. Santa Barbara, and in fact, our entire Pacific coast depends on tourism, on fishing, on trade, there's such a robust engagement with the coast, both economically, recreationally, et cetera. So we have to keep that in mind when people talk about the economic impact of environmental regulations. Oftentimes those regulations are actually saving our economy by protecting those resources that we so rely upon, both for recreation and for economic growth and sustainability. Now the other thing is that so we've been hearing these wild things, including the idea that the head of the oil company found out in the newspaper that the cause of the spill was corroded pipes. We'd heard over and over again from his people that the chance of any sort of problem was so negligible. The Senate created a select committee, the legislature created a select committee to look at this. I'm a member of that committee. Right. We had a big hearing up in Santa Barbara looking at all these issues, and yet there's been so many issues that still need to be examined. In fact, we're going to have one down in LA. One of the things that became very clear is that after they declared the whole thing was clean and everything was fine, these tar balls have continued to show up on the beach in my community, all throughout the South Bay. These globs of nasty, disgusting petroleum-based tar that have closed our beaches, that have led to people in hazmat suits having to walk around on Manhattan Beach, trying to clean things up. And so we need to get some answers about that aspect of this story. Mm-hmm. We need to talk a little bit about the legal implications. A lot of folks know there was just a big settlement in the Gulf with the attorneys general from Louisiana, Mississippi. I think we need to be talking about how to make sure that our communities are properly compensated, the first responders, the cities that have had to work so hard, the people who've been impacted economically. And we also need to be looking at taking the steps necessary to make sure this simply doesn't happen again. And we keep saying this, never again, but what are we going to do to make sure that's the case? So there's a couple bills that have come out of this process that are being spearheaded by Senator Hannah-Beth Jackson and Assemblymember Doss Williams. They're the kind of the leads on this committee. They, of course, represent the area where the spill took place. One of them is SB 414, the other one's AB 864, and they basically seek to make the state, basically create a situation where our response is going to be a little more nimble, that we'll be really looking at best available technology. Auto shutoff valves have been discussed. Making sure that there's a much stronger set of protections and procedures in place to really make sure this doesn't happen again, because this was just unacceptable.
But ironically, you still have you want perhaps more moratoriums on drilling out there on the coast, and yet you have the President of the United States signing off on drilling in ANWR. There's been this debate for years on tankering, pipeline, trucking oil. I mean, this debate has continued. We were lucky this time, and to some degree. I mean, obviously, you still have a fight ahead with this.
We do. I mean, look, those are bigger battles. And we're all working on issues relating to our dependence on oil. In fact, the Senate has this extraordinary SB 350, which seeks to reduce our petroleum use in the state of California by 50% by 2030. I'm a co-author of that. I'm very excited about that effort. It's making its way through the Assembly right now. Just got past committee. But this is actually a more specific question. How do we, the broader conversation about our dependence on oil and our need for oil and energy independence, California's leadership in trying to expand options and other ways to turn for alternative energy, that's all part of the conversation. These two particular bills have to do with making sure that the oil extraction process along the coast is as safe as absolutely possible. We understand that there are rights for extraction, but if we're going to be having people extract oil along our coast, even onshore, what are we going to do to make sure that there are procedures in place for much more quick response? That's one of the things that came out of the hearings. The response was pathetically slow, and having best available technology in place right now to shut off and mitigate and limit the impact of a spill when it starts. And so things like auto shutoff valves. I mean, this became a big part of the discussion at the hearing, and just making sure that these folks have in place the technology necessary to nip in the bud any problem once it appears.
Final quote before we bail out here. Let's talk poetry. You hosted just the other day Juan Felipe Herrera,
Yes.
the U.S. Latino Poet Laureate, the first one.
First one.
Former Poet Laureate here in California, from California's Central Valley. Just a quick question here as we talk about this. The significance of a Latino Poet Laureate coming from California. I mean, it sort of answers itself, but let me get your perspective.
It's
on
incredibly exciting. He's a wonderful man. He's so soulful. If you ever have the chance to meet him or read his poetry, it comes out.
And you're chair of the Joint
I'm
Committee
the
of the
chair
Arts,
of the Joint Committee of the Arts, so that's how I got involved
significant
with
to you as well.
What's also cool about him is he spent time all over the state. He grew up in Central Valley, but he went to high school down in San Diego. He went to school up in the Bay Area, so he's been everywhere. But his poetry has so much soul, so much verve. He engages so many of our communities, and it's just a great moment of pride for California to have our Poet Laureate now become the National Poet Laureate and bring the wonderful diversity and vibrancy of California and our culture to a national stage.
Right. I tell you, vaccinations, voting, oil spills, poetry, you have a lot of things on your plate. We appreciate your time and your advocacy for these issues.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
State Senator Ben Allen from the 26th Senate District down in Santa Monica, our guest here on Senate Spotlight, and that is this edition of Senate Spotlight. Join us next time around as we discuss important legislative issues and policies with the newsmakers and newsbreakers of the California State Senate. From the state capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching Senate Spotlight.